All right, what are you drinking?
The lemon lime poppy. And you?
I've got a LaCroix limoncello
Hmm.
that just tricks my brain into thinking I'm drinking pop.
All right. So what do you like better, LaCroix or poppies?
There's some of the poppies that I like. LaCroix's, well, none of the LaCroix's taste great. They're just whatever. And some of those, it's a little sweeter, and some of them are okay. I'm
Okay.
okay with them.
All right.
25 calories.
Not bad.
Those poppies, not too shabby.
Not too shabby. All
All
right.
right.
Oh, good job.
Welcome to Marriage with the Rocks. Oh, I thought we were going to say it at the same
Oh,
time.
sorry.
Welcome to Marriage with the Rocks. We're back.
We're back. The question we have for you tonight is, what if I want a great marriage?
What if I want a great marriage?
Yeah, but what if I want a great marriage?
What if I want a great marriage?
Okay, so what if we want a great marriage? What if you want a great marriage? What are 3 questions you can ask yourself and or your spouse?
And this kind of came from you or with some of your girlfriends, and this kind of came up.
Yeah, so my girlfriends, we're all reaching the age of becoming empty nesters. And so we were having a girls' weekend, and one of the gals was just talking about how her and her husband were talking about, okay, well, we have a fine marriage, but we kind of started opening up the door of, well, what if we could have an extraordinary marriage? And this idea of, oh, could it be more? And I think that has excited me more too about the stage of life that we're in. Like, oh yeah, like this can be something now that we can really focus on, even though we worked on it when we were raising our girls too, but you definitely come to this time in your marriage and you're like, okay, well, it can be fine.
Okay, let's
but it could also be extraordinary, or like we're just saying great. So yeah.
And I think it's different for the different seasons of life you're in. Like, how do you, if you want a great marriage, how do you do that when you're kids? How do you, once kids come along and that's busy, empty nesters, teen kids, whatever, like it's a little bit different at each. It can be.
Okay, but I think the questions that we have could.
Yeah, it might look a little bit different,
yes.
But like the heart of all of it's going to be the same.
Yeah. So what's the first question we could ask ourselves and our spouse?
Do you take your spouse for granted? Mm-hmm. Do you take your spouse for granted? I don't take you for granted. This is actually a dumb question for the two of us because we're great at this.
No, I think absolutely. I think you get into your routines, especially when you've been married for a while. There's certain things that I just expect. Like I don't think about, like the humidifier is always full.
It's always filled with water.
I don't take you for granted for that though. I said thank you.
There's just a little water fairy that fills it up.
But it's those types of things that you think about that you're like, oh.
And I think it's because you get in these roles. We talked about this before. Like you can get these roommate roles, and you're like, oh, we're just good roommates. Yeah, like we have sex every now and then, but we're just good roommates. And what if you want something better than that? And so, be careful to take your spouse for granted.
I think the one thing that you've done is acknowledging and saying thank you. Like you've, where it's, you acknowledge different things and it's the routine things. And hey, I really thank you for cleaning the bathrooms on the weekends or whenever I can. And I feel like when you're in your chores and the things that you've kind of resigned yourself to, where it's like, oh, where you acknowledge one another and the roles that you play.
Yeah, it matters if you see your spouse, if you acknowledge that you see them. Hey, I notice that you do this. I notice this. It's not just, hey, can I help with this? And so this is so easy to do. Anything that goes on for longer, it just becomes normal. So
I think about this when I go to work. And have you ever driven to work and you don't remember how you got there because you're in such a routine? You take the same route to work, you do the same thing at work, you come home, you do the same thing. So there have been times in my life that I'm just like, do something different.
Yeah, do something different. Get out of your routine. That matters. So this was really funny to me. Andrea, we were in the car together. I think we were going to
Home Depot or
something on the other side of town. And Andrea's just like, can we get fries and a shake at McDonald's? And you thought it was like winning the lottery. You were so excited for it. And so I think guys always think, oh, like dating or pursuing my wife has to be these grand romantic gestures. Like we got to go to a really fancy restaurant, or we got to get dressed to the nines, or all these things, like go to a cool bar or whatever it is. And you're just like, no, fries and a milkshake was amazing.
Well, and guys, you need to know your wives. Too.
Yeah,
I
this might
mean,
not be for your wife.
but I think for me, and I don't know if it's for all girls, but it's just like that little bit of adventure of like, okay, this is a little out of the norm,
Yeah, it was
and it's
different.
spontaneous and
Yep.
it's different. And I was like, hey, and yeah, it's like, can we just go do something different? How about fries and a milkshake? You're like, I do it every day. And
Yeah,
I'm
it
like,
kind
I
of
never
shows.
do it.
It more shows that Andrea just denies herself things
So yeah.
like McDonald's.
So break some habits, break some
Do something
routines,
different.
and just show that gratitude. But
Okay.
second thing.
Number 2, how well do you truly know your spouse? How well do you truly know your spouse? What do we mean by this?
So I was reading a marriage book, and it was interesting because they brought up this idea of becoming an expert on your spouse. And so I paused and thought, what do I really know about my spouse? And I know a lot of basic things, but we were just talking too about in your marriage, like I'm not the same person and he's not the same person from what, 27 years ago.
Oof.
And so like, how well do I know him now? And to me, it was more like, am I paying attention to the details? I have noticed that I may get a grand picture of like our marriage or any situation, right? Like even when I'm at work, but I very rarely will pay attention to little details. And so my goal is to listen to this. On my phone, I started a notes page that says the Book of Brian. Doesn't that sound like a very interesting book to read?
Well, I'd read that book.
And so I was like, what are some of his favorite movies? And I think I asked you, what's your favorite comedy? What's your favorite drama? And then like thinking about, okay, when we do go to restaurants, what does he really enjoy? Like, do I really pay attention to his hobbies, his likes, his dislikes?
What is my favorite candy bar? Any guesses?
Candy bar? You love peanut M&Ms.
Ooh, yes, I would have
Snickers?
accepted one of 4 answers: M&Ms, peanut M&Ms, Snickers,
Okay, 2.
Twix,
I thought you really liked the whatchamacallit.
and the whatchamacallit was number 4. Pretty good.
What was the third one you just said?
Twix.
Twix. See, I had already forgotten.
Book
So
of Brian.
when people are, hey, what can we get Brian for his birthday? I'm like, I don't love anything.
Anything with chocolate.
Now I'll have 4 things
great.
to give him.
When you get married and you're 5 years in, you are a different person 5 years in. Your spouse is a different person 5 years in. So even this is talking a little bit about, okay, are you growing with them? Or do you know who they are today rather than that picture that you had of them when you met in 1995? And so I think that's part of it. Is it gets monotonous. It can get monotonous if you don't want to be a roommate, just roommates. Like, how do you truly get to know your spouse? And
I think that keeps the adventure going too.
now all of this, like if there's hurt in your marriage, if there's bitterness, all those things, like this is really hard to do because it's like death by 1,000 cuts. Like there are things that are in between you that you have to work out and you have to talk about, all those things. But this is one of those things. It's just like, okay, I really know you 26 years in, 27 years in. So. All right, number 3, what if you're the only one wanting more?
That's a hard one.
Yeah, and so the idea behind this is like, what if you feel like you're the only one that wants a great marriage, but your spouse, they're just kind of fine with fine. And so, man, what do you do in that instance?
I think when I thought back of just our own marriage and just different points in our marriage where, whether it's I want, like maybe like you're yearning for growth for your spouse or you're hoping your marriage is going in a certain trajectory. Like I remember many points like just surrendering and praying and giving God my will. I always would be like, not my will, but yours. To surrender also like his will and his timing, whether it's again personal growth or as a couple growth. And I feel like I look back and I'm like, even in our marriage, there are certain things that we have had to be patient with and work through. And sometimes you have to come back and work through certain things from the past or things that you've and so I think there's perseverance with that, but I also think that God allows the time to just remind you to trust in him, and that he's got reasons for the different rates. I don't know if that's the right
At which
word,
you're
at
growing.
which you both grow. So
Yeah.
I think that's a huge one, is just literally coming on your knees and
That's right.
surrendering it to the Lord.
Yeah. So
But
pray, whether that's giving your marriage to God, or it's praying for your spouse, or it's praying that God would show you how he sees your spouse. I think that's a big
I
one.
think that's a huge one too,
Yeah.
because I think I've got my own desires and my own wants. And then I think when I started, again, when you start studying your spouse and start
Yeah.
learning more about them, you see how they're wired and you see how God has wired them.
Yeah.
I think that too is just like, oh, like God did not create you like he created me. And so, Lord, help me to see you through his eyes
Yeah.
and not through my own like glasses of what I think you
Yeah.
should be.
I think one of the ways to do this is, hey, if you want to see your spouse the way God sees your spouse, you need to be in one of the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the narratives, the stories of Jesus. I had a professor that always said, hey, you can never read the last book of the Bible, Revelation, and your faith will probably be fine. Like, you should read it. It's good. Like, you should read it so we know what's coming. But if you don't read it, your faith will probably be fine. If you are not in one of the Gospels for a period of time, that's going to affect your faith. Because in the Gospels, you see how Jesus interacts with people, you see what he thinks of them, you see how he loves us. And so that picture of how Jesus views your spouse is found in those Gospels. If you're the only one that wants more, share what you want for your marriage, but you have to do it in a respectful and not a condescending way.
I think you need to be careful that you don't approach your spouse when you're either heated or when you've got another agenda. I think it is something to again pray for timing and asking God, hey, when would like give me that opportunity? But I also think it's in your language of how you may approach it. I know in the past, even with the family, it's like, oh, let's talk about goals, or like, how do we see our family? Or it's maybe a family meeting, and maybe it's just a date night that you're like, hey, can we just talk about some of our dreams or things that we're hoping for one another, but also, so you could even like title that just to help you and your spouse kind of move in that direction where you can share. And then I do think it is just really being mindful that you're not sharing to cut someone down, but also like what I always think to check your motives. So I always have to say, why do I want this? Is it for him, or is it more for myself?
And if you want more, in your marriage, please don't go looking for that outside of your marriage. There's going to be a whole nother set of problems there. Now, everything we've said with the caveat of like, yeah, stick with your marriage, see your spouse as God sees them. All those things are true. If there's abuse in your relationship, that's a different thing. We're not talking about that. And so we're talking about two people that loved or love each other, but you've just become good roommates and you want more. So a couple of verses before we go. The first one comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, starting in verse 9. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken.
Like, I hear two things in that. One is that when you are in a partnership and in your marriage, like, it is like you have each other's backs. So like when you're down, like that is something too I've noticed, like when you get kicked down, like it affects me. And like it does, like you almost want to go after the person who has wronged you as well, right? But also the second thing is just that the cord of 3 strands cannot be broken. And so when you have God in the center of your marriage and you're both focusing on your relationship with him, then your marriage just gets stronger.
Second verse from Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word. Your marriage is going to take sacrifice, both sides. Husbands, wives, it's going to take sacrifice. You're not always going to get what you want. It shouldn't be entirely lopsided. Like, you both need to sacrifice. Just have a conversation. Talk through these things.
Do you want more?
Do you want more? Do you take your spouse for granted? How well do you truly know each other? What if you're the only one wanting more? Like, have that conversation.